who are you? I mean, how do you define yourself? Maybe by your name or your GPA, by your failures, your successes, maybe by your job title. And how about reality? How do you define reality? Maybe as the planets in the universe going around the sun, or maybe as everything that you experience every day, your thoughts, your feelings, what you see, what you hear, what you smell, what you taste. What if I told you that you and your reality are completely within your control to shape and mold as you saw fit, and that we could learn how to do this if we study a little bit of quantum physics, neuroscience, social psychology with a little bit of music thrown in for good measure? In his TEDx talk, Creating Freedom, Raul Martinez said, "To shape identities is to shape the future." But what future are we creating? Let's start with our physical bodies, right? Your physical body is made up of a series of systems that help you, live from day to day. For example, we have a circulatory system that moves blood and oxygen around our body. We have a digestive system that pulls nutrients out of food and eliminates waste from our body. And our systems are made up of organs that are made up of tissue that are made up of cells. And scientists know that cells are regenerating every day. Every day you make new cells and some cells die. And in fact, it takes 7 years for you to regenerate every single cell in your body. So you are a completely different person on a cellular level than you were 7 years ago. And this is why we can grow our hair and cut it and it grows back. We can trim our fingernails and they come back. How we can build muscle, how we can heal a bone when it breaks, how cuts heal. This is exactly why. So smaller than cells are molecules, which are arrangements of atoms. And atoms are made up of subatomic particles like protons, electrons, and neutrons. And there's some more newly discovered ones you may have never heard of. They're called neutrinos, quarks, bosons. There's some other ones as well. And all of these subatomic particles are bundled very tight together and they're vibrating really fast. Subatomic particles are vibrating, vibrating, vibrating. Everything around us is made of vibrations. And like 1,000 years ago, this nun, composer, and philosopher Hildegard of Bingen, 1,000 years ago, she said, all atoms are busy vibrating and making music in the universe. Somehow she knew this like 1,000 years ago. And she was right, and quantum physicists are moving even closer to this idea of music vibrating in the universe, and they have a theory called string theory. And this is the next big thing, or should I say the next small thing, in particle physics. And the idea with string theory is that all of our subatomic particles, these tiny little vibrating particles, are actually made up of something smaller, strings. And it's a theory, it's just a theory right now, because even though the math works out in the paper, we don't actually have a microscope that can see things smaller than subatomic particles right now, so it's still just a theory. But the idea is that these tiny little strings, some of them are just straight with 2 endpoints, and some are like closed loops like a rubber band. These different strings are vibrating, again, vibrating, and the different rates of vibration, the different frequencies, a fast vibration or a slow vibration or 2 different frequencies. These different vibrations make up the different subatomic particles. So maybe a string that's vibrating kind of slow makes a boson, maybe a string that's vibrating kind of fast makes like an electron. And doesn't this kind of sound like to you that we're made of music? If we're made of all of these like tiny little vibrating strings. So let's think about a cello, right? You have a cello. And you've got the strings here, and you pull a bow across it, and the bow vibrates the string. That's what brings the instrument to life. That's what makes it have music. And now, the next step of this is, gee, those notes are really pretty tenuous. They're easily changed. All we have to do in a cello is just move our finger the tiniest bit in either direction, and we change the frequency of that note. We change it. So, okay, here we are. We're kind of made of music. It's really easily changed. Why can't we manipulate ourselves then, change our notes, our frequencies just a little bit to make ourselves major or minor or happy or sad? All right, so our bodies are very much changing, but we're not just made of a body, right? We have a mind too. We have this thinking, feeling thing inside of our brain. And neuroscientists are starting to realize that our body and our mind are very closely linked. There's a neuroscientist, Antonio Damasio. He wrote several books. One of them is called The Feeling of What Happens. And in his book, he says, a mind is so closely shaped by the body. And I like to look at it the other way, too. The body is so closely shaped by the mind. Like when you feel love, you get like this warm feeling in your chest. Maybe you get like butterflies in your stomach. So the mind is saying to the body, don't you feel good? Do you feel that? And so there was this recent study done by a team of Finnish researchers. It's actually pretty recent, out on the social networks. It was like picked up by HuffPost. It was on NPR. And basically this team of Finnish researchers asked people across cultural bounds to simulate an emotional experience in their brain. Think about love, think about hatred, And when you do that, try to notice on your body where you're feeling these sensations. And they gave everybody these little outlines of a human form. Yeah, and they asked them to fill in the space with colors. Like if you felt warmth, you used reds. If you feel like nothing or negative feelings, you use dark colors. And it was pretty much true across all cultural bounds that everybody was making the same map, right? And so one of the researchers, she summarized it. It's kind of a long quote, so I wrote it down. Our emotional system in the brain sends signals to the body so we can deal with our situation. Say you see a snake and feel fear. Your nervous system increases oxygen to your muscles and raises your heart rate so you can deal with the threat. It's an automated system. We don't have to think about it. Just like right now, my heart is going pretty fast because I'm standing in front of you guys. All right, so we know that our body is really changeable, and we know that our body and minds are linked, but just how flexible our minds then? So back in the 80s, neuroscientists thought, all right, when you reach the age of 21, you're a fully formed adult, and your brain just absolutely stops forming, developing at that time. Whatever brain you have created for yourself at the age of 21, that was it. That was what you had to work with. Thankfully, they figured out it's actually just the opposite. And our brains are like these big lumps of silly putty that we can bend and shape at will. And now, 100 years before they figured that out, the Victorian writer George Eliot, who's actually a woman, that was her pen name, so she could be taken seriously, she wrote a book called Middlemarch, and she wrote in this book, "The mind is not cut in marble. It is not something solid and unalterable. It is something living and changing." So every day, our experiences, our actions, our thoughts are actively changing our brain. Your brain is made up of 100 billion neurons. Neurons are like brain cells, right? And neurons look like trees. Think of a tree with branches and a trunk and then a root system, right? And anything that happens that you think, that you feel, that you actively, do with your body is sent through your brain with electrical impulses, right? So you have these electrical impulses going all around your brain, and they travel from neuron to neuron, and the branches come together and they touch at a spot called a synapse. And as you do things more, these synaptic connections get stronger. So let's go back to music to think about that in a more clearer sense. So we have a student, right? Our student wants to learn how to play piano. They go to their first music lesson and they realize that they are going to be playing a lot of scales. And scales are a pattern that goes up the keyboard. You start at a note, you go up, you come back down. And the student also learns that in music, you do that again and again and again and again and again, and that's how you get better at your instrument. Well, every time this student runs up and down the keyboard, they're sending that same electrical impulse from neuron to neuron, same, maze that it's going through. And each time that signal passes through, it makes the connection stronger. So these synaptic connections are growing stronger, and the piano student is realizing it's getting a heck of a lot easier to play that scale. And they get to the point where they don't even have to think about what they're playing. Neuroscientists say about this, neurons that fire together wire together. So what's happening is the repetitive action is reinforcing that connection in the brain and making that behavior, that pattern easier. So conversely, say that our piano student says, hey, you know what? I actually want to play the trumpet. Piano is crap. I'm going to go play the trumpet. So they spend a year learning the trumpet, and new synaptic connections are formed to support that playing of the trumpet. And in fact, these other neurons, these connections that they created to play the piano are getting weaker because they aren't playing the piano still. They aren't reinforcing those connections. So after a year, they come back to the piano and say, let's see if I can play that C major scale again. And the fingers are fumbling all over, and they're like, gee, I was really good at it when I stopped. Well, the thing was, they didn't use it, so they lost it. You don't use it, you lose it. So patterns that you do not reinforce through repetition, those connections will go away. Which sounds pretty awesome, right? Because if you have a terrible habit, it's not out of your reach to undo it. All right. So scientists call this neuroplasticity. Neuroscientists call this neuro, your brain, and plasticity, flexibility. So this is all well and good. We know that our bodies are in a constant state of change. We know that our minds are in a constant state of change, but we aren't just living in a vacuum, right? We're not just on an island. We interact with people and ideas and things every day. So these can affect our reality and our perceptions as well. So we as humans, we do this thing called observational learning, social learning. We see something and we imitate it. And this is especially true for babies. And I have an 18-month-old niece. I don't know if you read my bio, but I call her Miss Beans, even though her name is Ella. And she's 18 months old, so she's starting to talk. And she's doing the da-da and the mama, because that's what we're doing in her face, da-da, mama. And she sees that. She sees that, and she tries to emulate. She tries to send it back to us. And so I've started to teach her vowels, and I do it in song. I go A-E-I-O-U, A-E-I-O-U. And every time she hears that, you see her look at me, and she's like, A-E-I-O-U, you know? And she tries to approximate what she's hearing, and she's doing what we all do as humans. It's observational learning, social learning. And this is not a behavior that we stop when we leave childhood. We continue to do this. We observe, we emulate, we do it throughout our lives. And this can be great for some things, but in some ways, it is not that great. And the example that I have is reality TV. So reality TV is so oftenly mistaken for reality. And in fact, it's not really so much reality. We see these over-the-top lifestyles and these dysfunctional relationships and this obsession with superficiality and, beauty. And we take that as truth. And I hate to burst your bubble, but so many TV execs have come out and said that actually, no, we sit in a room and we dramatize these people's lives to increase viewership and make advertising dollars. But the problem is that not everybody knows that, and people are taking this as truth and seeing these behaviors and emulating them. Now, the Girl Scouts of America did a survey. They surveyed about 1,100 young women, some that watched reality TV and others that didn't. And some of the findings are a little messed up, I think. 78% of these girls that watched reality TV thought that gossiping and backstabbing was normal to do among their friends. 70%. The girls that didn't watch it, still 54% of them thought it was normal, but 78 versus 54%. These next two just kill me. 38% of the girls that watch this reality TV thought that their value is based on how they look. No! 38% think that their value is based on their looks, and 28% would rather be recognized for their outer beauty than their inner beauty. This is wrong. I cannot. This is, boys and girls, This is wrong. Your inner beauty is going to kill your outer beauty every time, let me tell you. So we really need to understand how our popular media affects our perceptions, and we really need to take this control back. So in closing, Joseph Eager, he's a conductor and sort of like an amateur science enthusiast. He wrote a book called Einstein's Violin, and he says, nothing is static. Not music, not the universe. And I'd like to add that you guys, you're not static. We are constantly changing, we're constantly renewing, and we are constantly shaping our lives. Our mind, our bodies, and our perceptions are constantly changing. Oh wow, I have so much time. The cool thing is, though, is that what we're learning today is that you're in control of this change. You are totally, absolutely in control of this change, especially when it comes to our bodies, especially when it comes to our minds. And now that you have maybe been a little bit awakened about what happens in our environments and how that can affect us, you can be a little more cognizant of that. So Beethoven said, "I will seize fate by the throat. It shall certainly not bend and crush me." And if we know anything about Beethoven, he's the one that went deaf, right? Composer dude that went deaf. Well, obviously being a composer and a conductor, you kind of need your ears. Well, Beethoven said that he wasn't going to let that fate bend and crush him, and he found ways to work around that. I'm sure his hearing senses in his brain were flooded with different synaptic connections supporting different behaviors. So think of yourself, and also many scholars think that some of the best work that he wrote was after he went deaf. So let's think about ourselves as the composer, sitting down at a desk to write the music that is our life, and know that you have all the tools at your disposal, all the notes, all the vibrations that you need, and it's totally up to you what kind of music you write for your life, whether it's happy or sad or major or minor or whatever. So shortly after college, I moved to Boston, and it was a really pretty dark time in my life. I was pretty depressed and not doing so great. It was not the right thing for me at that time. And I sort of grabbed at any little bit of wisdom that I could to help me, get to the other end. And an unlikely bit came from a movie from 1979 called Being There with Peter Sellers. This was not 1979 though, by the way. Not that long ago. But the movie was from 1979. And basically the protagonist in this movie lives a very sheltered life. I'm not going to get into the details, but he basically never really interacts with humanity until he's an adult. And at the end of the movie, he kind of wanders away from this funeral in a cemetery, and he's walking, and then all of a sudden, he's like walking on this pond, and he stops, and he takes his umbrella, and he sticks it in the water, and he's like, well, yeah, I should be falling through there, but at the same time, the person giving the eulogy, their voice swells up, and they say, life is a state of mind. And this is something that has stuck with me over it's like 8 years now, I think. It's been 8, 9 years. Life is a state of mind. We are in control of how we live and how we perceive the world. So today I ask you, what kind of life are you creating with your mind? Thank you.